Hey everyone, welcome to M2F Story. Today I am going to share with you Brother Will Be My Sister Part 7, written by Jennifer. After what seemed an age, the three girls came downstairs very smartly dressed, looking more like 20-year-olds than 17, and I was startled at how mature my sister looked. They certainly looked the part of confident young women, and Wendy complimented them on their appearance. Carol switched on some music, so Michaela switched off the TV. We sat around waiting for the first guests to arrive, and half an hour later the doorbell rang. Carol went to answer the door, and a moment later came back into the room accompanied by a girl of their own age, plus her boyfriend, who introduced themselves as Trisha and Gary. They knew Michaela already, of course, and when they saw me, Trisha smiled and said, "Oh, isn't she sweet? I love that dress. It reminds me so much of the parties we had as kids." "How old are you, Lucy?" Susan went through the by-now familiar process of saying who I was and where I was from, and once again there was no question that they accepted me as an 8-year-old little girl. Well, what else would they do? By now I was supremely confident and comfortable in my role as Lucy. Over the next hour or so, more and more guests arrived, including the boyfriends of Carol and Fiona. By the time there were about a dozen couples in the room, I whispered to Susan, "I thought you said this was going to be an all-girls party." She looked at me and shrugged her shoulders. "Well, I thought it was," she said. "Looks like I was wrong." "Never mind, just enjoy yourself." The evening wore on and the noise grew louder, but by this time I was beginning to feel tired after the exertions of the day. I began yawning uncontrollably, and suddenly Susan came over to me and said, "You look tired, Lucy." "It's gone 9 o'clock. Do you want to go to bed?" I was too tired to argue, so I nodded sleepily and said, "Yes, I reckon I've had enough for today." Susan told me to say goodnight to everybody, including Michaela, who seemed grimly determined to stay awake, and she took me upstairs to our room. She removed the ribbons from my wig before brushing it out and putting it on its stand, and then helped me change into my nightdress. Then she tucked me into bed, kissed me goodnight, and shut the door behind her, reminding me to put my wig back on if I wanted to go to the bathroom. I lay there for a while thinking over the day's events, well pleased at how far I'd come in deceiving everyone that I was a girl. To the faint sound of the music playing downstairs, I drifted off happily to sleep, eager to see what the next day would bring. I woke up in the morning to a silent household. Susan was fast asleep next to me, and for a while I lay there quietly, watching the rain beating against the window pane. It looked like the sort of wet Sunday morning that discourages anyone from getting up, especially if they've been up late the night before. But like most 10-year-olds, I was impatient to be up and about, and decided to get myself washed and dressed. I climbed out of bed, and remembering to put on my wig, I padded off down to the bathroom for a shower. Locking the door behind me, I removed my wig and laid it down gently before taking my shower and drying myself off. Then I put on my nightdress and my wig again and went back to my room. My sister hadn't stirred, but by this time I was more than capable of dressing myself without her help. I opened the wardrobe door and sighed with pleasure as I looked at the row of little girl dresses that Michaela had outgrown hanging up there. I sorted through them and eventually drew out a primrose yellow dress and hung it up on the wardrobe door ready to put on. I looked through the pile of matching clothes and shoes which had been put on a trunk in one corner of the room and soon found what I wanted. I put on a white winceyette vest and a pair of pale yellow silk knickers with small satin bows, and then took down the dress from its hanger. I pulled it on, and by now had no difficulty in fastening the buttons down the back and tying the sash belt in a reasonably neat bow behind my waist. Then, taking a pair of white cotton ankle socks, I sat down on a chair and pulled them onto my feet, being careful to turn them down neatly. I'd selected a pair of black Mary Jane T-bar shoes to wear, and I soon had these strapped securely onto my feet as well. Now for my wig. I brushed it thoroughly, but as I did so, a sleepy voice said, "Morning, Lucy. Up already?" I turned and saw that Susan was awake. She saw me with the wig in my hands and said, "Just a minute, let me do that for you. Sit in front of the dressing table mirror." I did as I was told, and she got out of bed and came over to me. Giving the wig a vigorous brushing, she arranged the small undercap on my head, and then placed the wig carefully on my head. After securing it round the edges with spirit gum, she took 2 lengths of white satin hair ribbon and tied 2 bows in my hair, one on either side. That done, I stood up for inspection. She smiled at me and said, "You'll do. Now, if you're going downstairs, don't make any noise. People are still trying to sleep." "I won't," I promised, and quietly went out of the room while Susan got back into bed to continue with her lie-in. I could hear the quiet sound of a radio and the clatter of dishes coming from the kitchen, so I went downstairs to find Wendy busy clearing up the previous night's dirty dishes. She turned as I entered the room and said, "Good morning, Lucy. Nice to see that someone else is up. I don't think we'll see the girls before 10 o'clock. Would you like some breakfast?" "Yes, please," I said. "Well, just help me dry these dishes and I'll cook you something. Would you like to see if Michaela's awake and then you can have breakfast together?" "I am awake," said a sleepy voice from the door as Michaela came into the room in her pajamas. "Good," said Wendy. "But go and get washed and dressed first, Mick. And hurry up, we'll wait for you to get ready and then I'll start cooking." Michaela disappeared and I helped finish drying the dishes and putting them away. Michaela didn't take long to get ready, and soon returned wearing a shirt and a pair of jeans, her short hair parted as always on the boy's side of her head. We laid the kitchen table and sat and ate our breakfast cereal, while Wendy cooked us some bacon and eggs. She sat down with us to eat, and we were soon well fed and ready for the day. Breakfast over, she looked out of the window and said, "Well, it doesn't look like much of a day, I'm afraid. I thought you two might like to go down the seafront, but this rain looks set for the day. So what would you like to do?" "I don't know," said Michaela. "Anything you'd like to do, Lucy?" "I'm easy." "What about the aquarium?" I said, suddenly remembering that Brighton had one. "Well, you can go there if you like," said Wendy, "and you can go on the pier afterwards." Remembering how much I'd enjoyed the pier amusements on the Friday afternoon, I said, "Oh yes, I'd like that." "All right then, but I think I'll come with you. I'll just see if the girls are awake first." Wendy went upstairs and came back a moment later saying, "Well, they're more or less conscious, but we'll leave them to get up and cook their breakfast in their own time. Now why don't you two go and clean your teeth, and then we can go." We went upstairs to brush our teeth and were soon ready to leave. We went into the hallway to put on our raincoats, and as I was suddenly reminded of the pink Barbie Mac and boots I'd been given, "Could I wear the Barbie raincoat and boots, please?" I said. Wendy smiled. "Of course you can," she said. "Where did you put them?" They're up in my room," I said. "I'll just go and get them." I went up to my room and, taking the pink Mac and boots out of the wardrobe, ran downstairs with them. I sat at the bottom of the stairs and removed my shoes. I stood up and put my legs into the pink wellies, and then Wendy held the Barbie Mac for me while I put my arms into the sleeves. She pulled it on over my shoulders and fastened the press studs up the front. The Mac was slightly large for me, and as the hem and sleeves hung down well over my legs and hands, I really did feel like a little girl. In the meantime, Michaela had put on her navy blue gabardine school raincoat, defiantly buttoned up on the boy's side, and with the belt buckled around her waist. Wendy put on her beige poplin raincoat and, opening the door, could see that the rain was teeming down. Looking at me, she smiled and said, "Just a minute, Lucy. We don't want those pretty ribbons getting wet, do we?" See, she pulled up the pointed pixie hood of my raincoat and tied the tie tapes in a bow under my chin. She pulled the hood well forward and said, "There we are, Poppet. Nice and snug." I couldn't help smiling to myself at the thought of being called Poppet, a term usually reserved for very little girls. Wendy and Michaela took an umbrella each, and we stepped out into the rain as they put them up. Wendy shut the door behind us, and we set off through the heavy downpour. The rain lashed down on the quiet Sunday morning street, but as we turned into the main road, there were more people about, and by the time we reached the town center, they grew in number, some of them probably holiday makers determined to be out and about despite the weather. It took us about 20 minutes to reach the aquarium, and we immediately went in. As soon as we were inside, I unfastened my hood and threw it back off my head, and unfastened my Mac down the front. But I left it on to save the bother of carrying it. We went through the turnstile and were soon in a wonderland of underwater life. We wandered from tank to tank, and I loved the part where we walked through a transparent tunnel at the bottom of the largest tank, surrounded by sharks and rays. We stayed there for about an hour or so, until Wendy suggested that we might like to go across the road to the Palace Pier. We left the aquarium and found that it had stopped raining. We went on to the pier and headed straight for the amusements at the end. Once again, I was careful to maintain my persona as Lucy, and so while Michaela insisted on going on the ghost train and the more stomach-turning rides to show how macho she was, I was careful to show a preference for the gentler amusements. As lunchtime approached, Wendy suggested that we should head for home as she was planning to cook a Sunday roast, and the mention of lamb and mint sauce was enough to make us eager to get back. We walked home and soon arrived back to find that the girls were up and about. We hung up our coats in the hall, and Wendy set about preparing the Sunday dinner. I volunteered to peel the potatoes, and Carol produced a white frilly apron for me to wear so as to protect my dress. I swished about in it, and she told me that it was part of an Alice in Wonderland outfit she'd worn to a fancy dress party as a little girl. I couldn't believe my luck when she suggested that I might like to have it if it fitted me. She disappeared for a moment and came back a moment later carrying the blue dress to go with the apron, plus a pair of white frilly ankle-length pantaloons. Susan suggested we go upstairs for me to try it on, and in the safety of our room, she removed my dress and dressed me in the pantaloons, blue dress, and white frilly apron. She even removed my hair ribbons and replaced them with an Alice band that she pinned into position in my hair. She changed my shoes for a pair of black patent strap shoes, and the illusion was complete. I looked utterly sweet. Taking my hand, she led me downstairs, and a chorus of approval went up from everybody. Except Michaela, of course, who maintained a dignified aloofness and said nothing. I beamed with happiness as I stood in the middle of the room feeling every inch a girl, and asked if I could keep the dress on. Susan said yes until it was time to go home. She didn't feel that traveling on the train would be very suitable dressed as Alice in Wonderland. I felt saddened at the thought of returning home, as I'd had such a wonderful time. But all good things must come to an end. Sunday lunch was delicious, and after we'd finished with the washing up, we all settled down to watch TV in the lounge and let our lunch go down. The afternoon passed all too quickly, and eventually, Susan said we must prepare to leave. I went up to our room with her, and she removed my Alice in Wonderland costume, and she dressed me once more in my yellow dress. But she left my Alice band pinned into my hair. We packed our belongings into our case and managed to get all the clothes I'd been given into another case provided by Wendy. That done, we took our cases downstairs and put them in the hall. Suddenly seeing both my red Macintosh and the Barbie Mac hanging in the hall, Susan asked me which one I'd like to wear home. Since the red Mac was dry and the Barbie wellies were so bulky, we opted for the Barbie Mac. I removed my shoes, and Susan folded up my red Macintosh and packed it with my shoes into one of the cases. Then she helped me on with the wellies ready to go home. We went back into the lounge, and Susan said it was time for us to be off. "Well, it's been lovely having you both here," said Wendy, "so do come again. And please bring Lucy with you, Susan. I think she's delightful." What greater compliment could I ask? There were hugs and kisses all round, and Michaela grinned at me as she said, "Thanks for taking that stuff off my hands, Lucy. Now I know there's no chance of me wearing them again." We went to the front door, and Wendy opened it. The rain was once more teeming down, and Wendy helped me into my Barbie Mac and put up my hood while Susan put on her PVC raincoat and put up her hood. Then, picking up a suitcase each, we said a final goodbye and walked out into the driving rain. I was so glad of my Barbie Mac and wellies. Not only did they keep me dry, but I was well aware of just how much like a cute little girl I must look. The only drawback was the steady stream of water that splashed down off the hem of my raincoat into my wellies. My feet were soon soaking wet, but I didn't care. I was loving every moment of it. We climbed the hill up to Brighton Station and soon found ourselves out of the rain, standing on the station concourse. Susan checked on our next train, and we made our way onto the platform where our train was waiting. We climbed aboard and found ourselves somewhere where we could sit side by side. Susan put our cases on the luggage rack, and we lowered our hoods before sitting down. There was no one else within earshot. So as we sat back and looked at each other, Susan smiled and said, "Well, Lucy, how did you enjoy your weekend?" "Happy?" My expression must have told her everything. It was fantastic, the best weekend I've ever had. Everybody thought I was a girl. It was great. I just wish we could have stayed there for longer. Well, you certainly passed the test with flying colors. I heard the girls talking about you, and they thought you were so sweet. They said that they wished that Michaela was more like you. Considering you're actually a boy, that's quite a compliment on your performance, I reckon. You've done really well, and I'm proud of you. The question is, what happens next? I knew what she was getting at, and my face fell. You mean after Mum gets home? Exactly. We're going to have to tell her about your little secret sometime, you know. We can't go on covering up for you forever, can we? But she'll go mad. No, she won't. She might not like it, but she loves you and only wants what's best for you. She may not understand at first, but after seeing you in action this past month, there's no doubt that you really do feel much more comfortable as a girl. The question is, would you want it to be permanent? That's a lot different to just dressing up from time to time, you know. She could see that I felt very unhappy about telling Mum, and smiling gently, she took my hand and said, "Look, why don't I break it to her gently first? Then we can all sit down and talk about it together, and I promise you she won't go mad, I know she won't." Her supportive and reassuring smile decided me. "Well, I suppose you're right," I said hesitantly. "We can't hide it forever. But as long as you stay with me while we talk." "Of course I will." "Now don't worry about it, you'll be fine, so just enjoy the next few days and we'll work out exactly how we're going to tell Mum." The train pulled out, and all the way back to Horsham, she continued to reassure me that everything was going to be all right. Her powers of persuasion gradually reduced my fears, and by the time we reached home, I was ready for the inevitable moment of disclosure. I continued to live as a girl for the remaining days until Mum arrived home, and by this time I felt totally at ease living as Lucy. I needed no more assistance from Susan to help me dress and undress, and all the right little girl mannerisms were by now second nature. She'd certainly done quite a job in the last month, and by now she'd convinced me that telling Mum was the best thing to do. Best of all, I was no longer afraid to tell her. I was ready. The night before Mum arrived back, Susan suggested that we make no effort to hide my dresses, but to leave them hanging in my wardrobe, ready for when she would tell her my secret. She said it would be best to be completely open about it. And so, as I went to bed that night, I left my wardrobe door open so that I could see my dresses hanging up in a neat row. My Barbie raincoat hung on the back of my door, and my wig was on its stand on top of my dressing table. Tomorrow was to be all or nothing. The next morning I dressed as David, and it felt horrible. My boys' clothes felt heavy and uncomfortable after the delicate satin of my dresses. My trousers rubbed against my legs and felt rough after spending a month with the air flowing free around my bare legs. I fervently hoped that we could persuade Mum to allow me to dress as Lucy, at least from time to time. That would be better than nothing. That's it for today. Hope you have enjoyed it.